This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and this is the LG Stylo. This is a affordable but pretty good quality phone that's available on Sprint. That's the version we look at. Also on Boost Mobile, which, you know, is in business with Sprint there. T-Mobile, Metro PCS, so a couple of different carriers. 5.7-inch display, HD. Looks a lot like the LG G4 superficially. It has a pretty good camera. Again, that's going to vary depending on which model you look at. 8 megapixel for this one, 13 megapixel on T-Mobile and Metro PCS. Dual band Wi-Fi, 4G LTE, and most interestingly, from where the name comes from, is the stylus. That's why it's called the stylus. So you get this little pen built in for you note takers, you folks who don't like to touch the screen, art, anything. We're going to look at it now. So this is the LG Stylo. Clear LG design language going on here. It looks, in fact, a lot like the LG G4. If we turn around and take a look at the back, it's got LG's now familiar design language. We have the curved plastic back right here. We have the volume controls right there, and the power button is right in the middle. There's the camera. There's your flash. There's your laser autofocus. That's pretty nice to have on an affordable phone. This is $288 full retail on Sprint, or around $12 a month. It's also available on other carriers, as we mentioned too. And if you want to see it compared to the LG G4, we have that right here. Obviously a more expensive phone with even higher end features. That costs about twice as much money. So, pretty similar. And turn around to the front, you can see the LG G4, which has a higher resolution display, also has a brighter display by a little bit. In terms of footprint, they're almost the same. The Stylo is just a little bit bigger. So 5.7-inch display here. This is what's called HD, not full HD. I know that can get confusing. That means 1280 by 720 pixels or 720p. It's not 1920 by 1080. It's not QHD. You're not going to get those super high resolutions at this price. It doesn't mean it's not a pleasing enough display. It is IPS. The viewing angles are, you can see, it does fade out a little bit more than some IPS displays, but still certainly good enough to see easily enough. It's bright. It's colorful. Pleasing enough at 5.7 inches. You know, it's 258 ppi. If you got super duper eagle eyes, maybe you'll be able to see jaggies in type and all that sort of thing, but it's perfectly nice. Inside we have the Qualcomm Snapdragon 410. That's the step up evolution from the Snapdragon 400 from last year. 1.2 gigahertz quad core CPU, so that's a middle of the road CPU. We have 1 gig of RAM in the Sprint model and the Boost model as well. If you go with T-Mobile or Metro PCS, you get 2 gigs of RAM. Funny how there are these just little differences there. Dual band Wi-Fi 802.11n, not AC for this price. Bluetooth 4.0, no NFC, and of course it has the usual GPS. We have a 5 megapixel front camera for you selfie folks. And on the back, for this one, we have an 8 megapixel camera. As I noted, the T-Mobile version gets a 13 megapixel camera. Laser autofocus right there. There's our laser autofocus, and there's an LED flash there. And LG is quite good at imaging. As you know, they made a big deal of it for the LG G4, but even this 8 megapixel shooter is pretty pleasing. We'll look at the camera in more detail later. Speaker fires from the bottom, right from the grill right there. It's actually reasonably loud, and yes, it has a removable battery, which is still so far a hallmark of LG devices. You got a little pry point right there, and so you can pull the back off. And there you have the 3,000 milliamp battery. On the T-Mobile version, it's 2,900 milliamps. Why that even varies, I couldn't tell you. And there's your stacked SIM card slot and micro SD card slots. Compatible with micro SD cards up to 32 gigs in capacity, according to LG. The phone has just 8 gigs of internal storage with about 3.4 gigs available for your use. So for you hardcore gamers or folks who want to store a lot of movies and even music on your phone, you got the card. Again, but that's maxed out at 32 gigs, so keep that in mind. With Android, it's very easy to keep your media on cards. Applications, not so much. This is running Android 5.0 Lollipop, by the way, of course, with LG UI. In terms of LG's UI, you can see what they've got here. They're customized square icons. Again, not so different from what we saw on the LG G4. It doesn't really slow things down too terribly, so we're not going to complain about it. And you can always use a third-party launcher if you don't like it. In the settings screen like this, it starts out in 4-tab mode, which thankfully you can switch to single line mode, so you're not tapping between tabs so much just to try to find what you want. Standard features for LG phones are the double tap to turn it on, double tap of the screen to turn it off. And turned off, but you can turn it on, is the multi-window multitasking, where you can have split screen, 2 apps running at once. They may have turned that off by default given the fact that this has only 1 gig of RAM and a 1.2 gigahertz quad core, not the super fastest CPU, though it can handle it. I was running some things in split view and it managed okay. But the real interesting thing about this, and what makes it not just a budget LG G4, is the pen, hence the name Stylo, like stylus, get it? Now this little guy has some pretty nice weight to it actually, and a rubbery tip like a capacitive pen, but this pen will do absolutely nothing on an LG G4 or other capacitive phone, so it's interesting technology in there, not quite sure what they've done. You can use it just to navigate around. More interestingly, with their Notes Plus application, you can use it to take notes. Beyond that, it's not as fancy as Samsung's Note pens in terms of the software that you get. It's more no frills, more basic. It doesn't know when you've taken the pen out, for example. It doesn't have a fancy dancy launcher. But for basic note taking, a little sketching, that sort of thing, it works just fine. So here we are in Quickmemo Plus. And now I'm resting my hand on the glass and it's working without doing any kind of vectoring, annoying stuff like that for the most part. So that's pretty good. We've got an eraser tool right there. You get the idea. And if you switch to text mode, you can actually start typing. So you're not going to get character recognition, anything like that. But for just quick note-taking, diagramming, drawing an intersection, you know, that sort of thing. It gets the job done. Now, software, besides the LG customized software, which has things like the knock-on, knock-off, like I said, you can even customize the order of your buttons down here. Everything else is loaded by Sprint that you see here, except for this one little folder I created with benchmarks. There's a lot of software. If you're a Sprint customer, you're probably used to that they put on here. Oh, well. I'd like to see a little bit less bloatware, but carriers obviously aren't listening to us reviewers who keep saying, less bloat, please. This has Sprint Spark, and it also supports Sprint HD Voice for conversations with other Sprint HD Voice compatible phones. On board, we have both the WebKit web browser and the Chrome web browser, so you have your choice of that. Of course, you can download whatever third-party browsers that you want. In terms of network speeds in the Dallas area, now this is something that is going to vary depending on where you are and how Sprint's coverage is in your area. You can see the results that we've gotten in our 2 most recent tests. Not too fast, and that is on LTE. Now, again, it's going to vary in your area. We'll give it one more test right now and see how it does. Sadly, Sprint has been lagging in terms of LTE speeds behind the other 3 big carriers. Voice quality on the phone, on the other hand, is just fine, even when speaking to somebody not using another Sprint HD compatible phone. Clear, audible, no problems with that. So how about benchmarks? Well, with the Snapdragon 410, which is firmly in the mid-range category among CPUs, and you know, honestly, it's fast enough for a lot of us. If you're really into the latest 3D games or heavy multitasker, not so much. It won't be what you're looking for, but for average use, just web browsing, social networking, using maps, all that sort of thing, it's just fine. It scores about 1/3 of the speed of the flagship fastest phones on the market, which include LG's own G4, the Samsung Galaxy S6, and even the LG Flex 2. In Quadrant, it scored 14,559. In Antutu, 21,452. Geekbench 3, 459 single core, 1413 for the multi-core test. SunSpider JavaScript tests where lower numbers are better. In Chrome, which generally runs JavaScript tests slower, 1545, and 1031 in the WebKit web browser, which would be the quicker one generally speaking, and it is again here. The fastest phones score in the 400s typically, and anything up to 1,000, 1,500 is pretty darn acceptable, so the Stylo is doing okay. Camera on the LG in terms of software works not unlike other recent LG phones, like again the G Flex 2 or the LG G4. You've got your little gear over here where you can change aspect ratio, turn HDR auto on or off, show a grid, use a self-timer. You've got modes over here, panorama or auto. You won't find quite as many features here as you will certainly on the flagship LG G4. You can switch your cameras back and forth, control your flash. And tapping on that button is what brings up those menus right there. And then obviously you got your shutter button right there, or you can just do tap to focus and shoot. And you can switch to video by going to the video button. Shoots 1080p video, so does the front 5 megapixel camera. And here are some photos that we've taken so you can see how it does. Now LG cameras are typically pretty good. So here's a flower taken in bright sun, a Mojave rose. I think we got some white out on the petals, but given that it's a sunny day, that's just acceptable. Colors are pretty nice on it actually. Now here you can see the whiteout. It doesn't quite handle harsh lighting as well as some of the higher end cameras, though for any camera, sunlight to shade can be a challenging issue, but it has completely whited out the rocks in that corner. But the part that it hasn't whited out is pretty sharp. Now you can see there's, on this 8 megapixel camera, there's a little bit more image processing going on, so it looks a bit painted on at times. Water looks good. Here's a distant shot. Now here, as we zoom in, you can see that the details actually are quite watercolory and painted on those rocks, as it's nicely filling in detail for us and making things look smooth and fairly sharp there. But overall, I mean, that's quite a pretty camera. I think most people will be pleased with that, unless you're really into the higher end imaging options on some of the more expensive phones, or perhaps even your standalone camera. And now so you can hear the speaker and see how good a job Sprint's LTE does. I mean, given the speeds we saw weren't that great. Let's see if we can stream video nicely. So far it looks doing pretty well.
This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and we're living large here today. We have the
loud.
Microsoft Lumia 640 XL. The XL version, as you might guess, is bigger than the non-XL version. 5.7
So there's max volume right there. So that's a pretty darn loud phone, and in the rear firing speaker isn't really hampered much by my hand being back there. In fact, my hand is actually reflecting the sound back forward towards us right now, which is a good thing. So it does that well. Sprint's network handled the streaming. The quality stayed nice and sharp. Good job. So how about battery life? Big phones have room for big batteries, and in this case, because it's not running with the fastest possible CPU or the highest resolution available display, battery life is actually quite good. For those of you who said, well, God, flagship phones are nice and faster than I actually need, and the battery life just gets tanked by all that power and all that resolution, this one easily goes through a full day. I mean, until bedtime on a charge, and that's with moderate use. I'm talking about web browsing, streaming a half-hour episode on Netflix, taking some photos, shooting a little bit of video, not playing too much in the way of games. If you get into the games, I mean the demanding 3D games more so than something like Candy Crush, you can tank the battery life a lot quicker, obviously, and that's true with any phone. Heat is also not a problem. The back of this phone is just not going to get hot. The Snapdragon 410 is just not a hot CPU, so in terms of a practical phone that can last you for a while, give you a big display, takes pretty nice pictures, and has a nice speaker, well, the LG Stylo's got it all covered, and of course it's got the little pen for those of you who like that feature but really couldn't afford or didn't want to spend the money on the Samsung Galaxy Note or just aren't into Samsung phones. So that's the LG Stylo. It's available now, again, very affordable, $288 full retail on Sprint. So we've looked at a bunch of unlocked phones lately that work on AT&T and T-Mobile, but not on Sprint or Verizon. So you see there's still an affordable choice for you for a very nice quality Android phone with a big screen. Anyway, you get the pen too. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.